When systems runs at scale, under stress, with real money, back then, failure was most theoretical. Today, failure has very real consequences. Decentralization should not mean the rules are correct but the outcome is unpredictable. A mature DEX should offer transparent rules, predictable behavior, and known failures mode. If a system only works under ideal network conditions and ideal market conditions,
Welcome to the Hard Truth in Crypto with Universe Pro. I'm your host, YC. This is a podcast about conversations on the uncomfortable truth behind crypto system. In today's episode, we are shifting the lens away from the ideology and narratives and pulling it directly down to the engineering and system layer. Today's guest isn't an analyst. He's not marketing. He's someone who actually has to live with the consequences of a system in production. He's the CTO of Universe Pro and one of the long-time core developer in the Solana ecosystem. Anthony, welcome to the show.
thanks YZ. Glad to be here, especially in a space where it's okay to speak honestly.
You've been deep in Solana ecosystem for years now, really on the front line. So I'm curious, from a personal perspective, what feels like the biggest change in the industry compared to when you first entered it?
The industry looks much more mature now, but underneath, the real problems are actually more concentrated and more visible. Early on, people were mostly exploring what was possible. Now we are dealing with what actually happens. When systems runs at scale, under stress, with real money, back then, failure was most theoretical. Today, failure has very real consequences.
Speaking about consequences, I have to ask a slightly personal question. So, you've been in the Solana system for years. I'm guessing you have helped some SOL along the way. With the recent drawdown, were there moments where even engineers feel the pain?
Of course, I've held Sol, and of course, I've lived through volatility. But I think the biggest difference between engineers and pure traders is this. We are used to thinking in cycles. If you are contributing to a system, price movement is just one signal. It's not the conclusion. Volatility is part of the process, not the final verdict.
I think that distinction is really important because for a lot of people entering crypto today, the first thing they encounter is price. Not architecture, not design, not constraint, but for someone like you who's writing code at the base layer, your focus is obviously very different. And that's why I want to frame today's topic this way. You're not watching this industry from the sideline. You're someone who is accountable every day for the system stability, performance, and what's happened when things break. So, let's start from an engineering point of view. If you have to describe the current state of the blockchain industry in one sentence, technically speaking, how would you put it?
If I had to put it in one sentence, I'd say this. This is an industry trying to run production systems while still thinking in prototype mode. A lot of systems looks like they are live, they are deployed, money is moving through them, but by engineering standards, many of them are still operating at a demo level. For example, a lot of systems never clearly define things like what happens next, which component degrade under extreme market conditions. When some things break, does the system gracefully degrade or does it just lose control entirely? In traditional financial systems, those questions have to be answered before launch. In crypto, the attitude is often, let's get it running first. The problem is when you are running a system that holds real asset and real risk, getting it running usually means pushing the cost of testing onto the users. That's why I don't think this industry lacks smart people. What it lacks is an engineering mindset that treats system as a long-term infrastructure.
That analogy really lands. From the outside, people often assume that once the system is live, once the money is flowing through, it must already mature. But listening to you, a lot of these systems sounds more like an unfinished experiment, where real user become the test environment. And that probably explains why this industry keeps repeating the same type of failure. So, let me push you further. From the perspective of someone who actually writes system and is accountable for their consequences, what's the biggest technical self-deception in the blockchain industry right now? What are the problems that people privately understand but consistently avoid talking about?
The biggest self deception is this using decentralization as an excuse for bad engineering. When systems are slow, laggy, or have a poor UX, the immediate response is often that's the cost of decentralization. From an engineering perspective, that's not a cost, it's a design choice. Decentralization doesn't mean you get to ignore concurrency. It doesn't mean you can ignore failure modes. It doesn't mean you can ignore extreme scenarios. A lot of systems don't struggle because the chain limits them. They struggle because during design, they were never intended to handle real world pressure in the first place. If I had to summarize it in one line, decentralization is not a liability waiver for poor engineering.
I really agree with that. We see it all the time. Some things goes wrong, and then the explanation becomes, it's the chain's fault. It's the market's fault. From the perspective of someone actually building this system, how much of that is genuinely true?
Honestly, most of the time it's responsibility being pushed away. Every system should be very clear about its boundaries before it goes live. If you know your system will behave poorly under stress, if you know extreme market conditions will cause instability and you still choose to deploy it, that's not a chain problem, that's a decision. The most important job of an engineer isn't just to make a system run, it's to clearly tell the world when the system will fail and what happens when it does. That's what accountability looks like at an engineering level.
Let's talk specifically about DAX. For a lot of people, the entire understanding of a DAX still fits into one sentence: non custodial, more transparent, more decentralization. From a low level system perspective, what do you think is the core contradiction in the today's DAX landscape?
I think there's really one more contradiction. Users are already using DEXs for production grade trading, but many DEXs are still being supported by experimental grade systems. Conceptually, non custodial, transparent, decentralized, all of that is correct. But those are principles, they are not system capabilities. From a system perspective, the fundamental tension in DEX design is trying to achieve two things at the same time: full decentralization and an experience with nearly centralized exchange certainty. The engineering complexity in the middle is massively underestimated. A lot of DEXs are designed around an assumption like this: as long as the rules are public, as long as an assets are custodied, users will accept slower execution and lower stability. But real trading doesn't work that way. That's why I don't think the problem is that decentralization is too hard. The problem is that many systems were never prepared to take responsibility for real trading. Decentralization should not mean the rules are correct but the outcome is unpredictable. A mature DEX should offer transparent rules, predictable behavior, and known failures mode. If a system only works under ideal network conditions and ideal market conditions, that's not a trading system, it's a technical demo.
Let me push this a bit more directly. Over the years, we have seen so many so called DAX. Some rise quickly and disappear just as fast. Others never technically rug, but users' capital is slowly consumed by the structure. So, from the perspective of a low level system engineer, what kind of problem in today's DAX space are getting dangerously close to a scam territory, but are still being packaged as a normal behavior?
There's one thing that needs to be made very clear. Not every problem is a rug, but many failures are design failures. In the DEX world, there are several extremely dangerous structures that are constantly being rationalized. The first is this: engineering failures disguised as market risk, systems that distort under extreme volatility, liquidation logic that breaks down, oracle delay that create abnormal pricing. These are engineering problems. But the explanation you usually hear is that's how on chain trading works. Users should understand the risk. From an engineering perspective, that explanation is almost offensive because what it really says is, I know this will break and I have chosen not to fix it. The second is knowingly launching systems that only function under best case assumptions. If you know a system will harm users under worst case conditions and you still deploy it, then regardless of intent, the outcome for users is the same. For me, complexity itself isn't the problem. Using complexity to responsibility is. Many DEXs didn't collapse because they were scam. They collapsed because they were engineered to fail.
Let's switch gears. We are going into a quick fire of Q&A round. I'm looking for industry truth only, no filters. You ready?
Let's do it.
Okay. Why do so many decks ultimately fail?
Because many DEXs are designed to launch, not to survive.
That's brutally honest. So let me push further. Are a lot of DEXs today basically scams?
Not necessarily scams, but many of them are systems that were designed to fail safely for the builders, not for the users.
Has decentralization been mythologized?
Decentralization isn't the problem. What gets abused is the phrase, this is decentralized, you are on your own.
What's the biggest mistake regular user make?
They treat uncertainty as a normal experience. In a trading system, uncertainty isn't an experience, it's a risk.
Give me one sentence. What's the biggest problem in crypto right now?
Users are conducting real trades on systems that are still experimental.
Real money is running through experimental system. That's painfully accurate. If you look back at the 2018 ICO era, a lot of projects are still even in 2026, stuck at the slide deck stage. So, why does the narrative always beat engineering in this industry?
Because narrative can create hopes in week. Engineerings take a year to deliver certainty. But the market is trained to reward speed. So you can end up with systems that are prepared for the next marketing moment, not for the worst case scenario. That's not innovation, that's sprinting. And trading systems has never been sprint events.
That was extremely technical. Okay, let's lighten up things a bit and talk about what community really wants to know. Simple question. Are we in a bull market?
I'll answer directly. No. What we are seeing is capital running, but systems aren't ready yet. A real bull market doesn't start with prices rising, it starts when infrastructure gets stressed and survives. When systems remain stable under pressure and users keep using them even without subsidize. That's the prerequisite for a real bull market.
You even answer market question like an engineer. So then why do so many people feel like a bull market is just around the corner?
Because the market hasn't given people hope for a long time. So the moment there's even a small price move, a new narrative, or a bit of attention returning, emotions get amplified. But emotions isn't structure. If you mistake this feels good for a bull market is here, you usually burn out your patience before the real bull market even begins.
I completely agree. Emotion returning doesn't mean the bull market has returned. So let me ask you this. If you could leave one sentence for the community that's still in the market right now, what would it be?
Don't rush to prove that you were right. First, make sure you were standing next to a system that can survive. Bull markets don't reward the earliest participants, they reward the ones who are still here.
I think today's episode was very different. From most crypto conversation people are used to hearing, for me, this is the kind of conversation from an engineer perspective, it's essential. Because when system actually fails, the people who bear the consequences are always the user. Anthony, thank you for being this honest today and for explaining this issue in a way that's not flattering but very real. So, I'll end with one final question. If you could leave just one sentence for everyone still in crypto, what would it be?
Don't build your hope on a system you don't understand how it can fail.
That's a powerful line. Thank you, Anthony. And thank you to everyone who stayed with us until the end. If you found value in today's episode, share with people who are genuinely taking this industry seriously. We'll see you next time.